We're joined now in the studio by Labor MP for Griffith in Queensland, Terri Butler, and National Party Senator John Wacka Williams from New South Wales. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning and welcome back, Chris.
Thank you. Now, Senator, you're a representative of the Bush. Do you think the Bush has been unfairly treated in these cuts to the ABC?
Yeah, I'm disappointed with some of the cuts to the regional areas of the Bush Telegraph, etc. Look, Mark Scott gets paid the big dollars. He's on more money than the Prime Minister. And so Mark Scott should go and have a talk to Louise Evans. Louise used to work, she's a manager in Radio National. She had a column in the Fairfax yesterday. She was saying there's plenty of fat. There's this culture of not 9 till 5, but 10 till 3 is a culture of many of the workers there. Look, there's plenty of room to be cut. Look what the...
Well, so have the cuts been in the right places then?
I think he could be a lot fairer. I think he would look at the back room at Ultimo, etc., where it's a hugely expensive place to run. I mean, you're talking $5.5 billion over 5 years, cut down to $5.2 billion. They're not severe cuts. Every agency has had to get efficiency so we can bring the budget into order. And I think he ought to have a look at the Louise Evans story, perhaps have a chat to it.
But
trim the fat.
Back to my question, though, is the Bush supporting an unfair burden in these cuts?
I think Mark Scott is perhaps being a little bit unfair as far as the cuts to the regional areas. But that's his job, and the fact is this. If the budget's not in order in 20 years' time, what sort of an ABC will we have? Probably one that's hit the brick wall. OK,
now, Terri Butler, Labor's made the point long and loud that this is a broken election promise. Moving beyond that, though, if the government is cutting back other public sector organisations, the public service, defence force pay, etc., isn't it fair that the ABC and SBS have their fair share of cuts, as it were?
Chris, I'm kind of shocked actually to hear such callousness from someone so lovely as Wacka, because talking about people who 400 jobs are going, 400 jobs before Christmas, and Wacka wants to talk about waste. I don't think that those people working in the ABC are somehow engaging in waste. We've got great quality public affairs programs. We're going to see hits to state-based public affairs programs like the state-based 730s. We're going to see hits to regional radio. Bush Telegraph is going. I think it's frankly really disappointing that on a day when people are reeling from hearing that they are going to lose their job right before Christmas, people who have served the ABC and have served the public interest to be talking about 10 till 3 culture, I think that's really disappointing. And on the point, Chris, about is it fair enough? It is not fair enough. You don't go to an election, stare down the barrel of a camera and say there'll be no cuts to the ABC and the SBS if that's not what you mean. And the Prime Minister yesterday in question time put on an incredibly disingenuous display. We asked him, did you say it? And he didn't want to talk about what he'd said. It's been exposed as such a blatant lie by this Prime Minister, and he should be held to the same standard that he has sought to hold others in previous terms. He should be held to that standard.
Senator Williams, I must ask you about this, not whether it was a lie or not, but it is a broken promise, isn't it?
Look, on the 6th of September last year, no one's denying that Tony Abbott, Prime Minister now, said he would not make any cuts to the ABC. But the damage came in December with my EFO. We had no idea. We did say numerous times before the election, Chris, that we'd bring the budget in order, and then come my EFO, the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook, $667 projected debt, $667 billion projected debt. Now, that no one expected that. This was a mess you left us in, the Labor Party left us in. Hence, we've said we'll bring the budget in order, hence the decision's been made.
So when the EFO this year, in December, shows the budget deteriorating even further, where do you cut then?
Well, I hope it's not the case, but I am very concerned of what you're saying because of iron ore prices, of coal prices, of slowing world economy, even China slowing a bit. This is a concern I've had for several years. In fact, I said to one Labor senator before the last election, no matter who wins the election, the budget is going to be a tough item to handle.
So if MIFO does show the budget situation deteriorating, does that overrule all other promises about cuts and supporting government spending?
Well, we promised to get the budget in order, and if we had some support from those opposite who even had $5 billion cuts in their plan, now they won't support it. They're doing everything to obstruct us getting our budget in order. Simple as that.
Okay, now can we move? One of the
Well,
things.
can I say that before we do?
I think
Chris,
Terry's raring to go
no one
here.
is expecting a $667 billion debt is because no one expected Joe Hockey to come in and double the deficit in MyEFO compared with the pre-election fiscal outlook. No one expected him to change parameters that had been in place since the Howard years for assessing and making forecasts into the future. No one expected him to come in and double that deficit. And if you want to talk about debt and deficit, I think that maybe the next MyEFO should be handed down a little bit sooner than Christmas, than just before Christmas, so that people actually know in this next, what's really a mini budget, exactly what other cuts and nasties there are going to be for the Australian people and what other services are going to be affected.
Okay, now Senator, the government is still 6 months on trying to get elements of the budget through, trying this week and next week to get changes to higher education through. The GP co-payment seems to be on the back burner. Is it time, given that we're heading almost into a new budget round, is it time just to concede that that's just not going to get through?
Well, I'm sure the Health Minister is having negotiations with the crossbenchers. That's the Senate, that's the makeup of the Senate. Whether we can get it through or not, who knows. When you look back at the history of Australian governments, there are very few governments, Fraser government and the Howard government actually did control the Senate. Every government from all sides of politics have had to negotiate with crossbenchers to get that support to get bills through. Let's see how the negotiations pan out, Chris, but I can't say for sure this is going to happen or that is going to happen.
Okay, Terri Butler, what's your view? Is the Senate now more easier for the government to deal with, or more difficult, or how do you see the new political landscape?
Look, I've got to say, it's really up to the government to see whether or not they can effectively negotiate. I think they might have learnt some lessons recently about not being quite so arrogant and working with the senators because of the disallowance of the FOFA regulations. I hope that they've learnt the lessons from that. Instead of just walking around and lecturing everyone, perhaps they will be more prone to negotiation. I'm actually pleased, Chris, that the government doesn't have the full control of the Senate, because last time they had full control of the Senate, what did we get? We got work choices. That's what we got last time the coalition had control of the Senate while they were in government. We know that when they get that full control, they go crazy with ideology, and work choices was a prime example of that. I'm pleased that they have to negotiate. I can't really speculate on the lay of the land. I think everybody knows it's a movable feast in there at the moment, but they need to learn to work with other interests and other views than their own.
Senator Williams, as you've just pointed out, it's very rare for a government to control the Senate. It's only happened a couple of times in the last 50 or 60 years. Yet other governments, Coalition and Labor, have been more successful in dealing with the Senate. This government seems to have ongoing problems of getting its policies through. Why is it having such a difficult
Well, Chris,
time?
the previous government didn't have virtually any problems with the Senate because the Greens and the Labor Party made up the numbers. And we know how close they are. They're very strong unity, the Greens and Labor Party, and hence virtually everything they wanted went through. That's a fact.
Well, they didn't control the House of Representatives. So.
No, they didn't. But what they got through the House of Representatives went straight through the Senate.
Would you like to swap the situations with the Gillard government?
No, thank you. I'm glad we were elected with a good margin.
Can I ask you about the policies? Terry's just brought up the repeal of the FOFA legislation, something that you had a very close
look at it, watched it closely, Chris.
Okay, so what's your reaction to that?
It should never have happened last week because this week the legislation was coming in. Matthias Cormann made the regulations on the 1st of July this year. Then the legislation was coming this week where we could have debated the issues, they could have moved their amendments, we could have kept the grandfathering, the cash flow and the value of all those small businesses that bought those businesses on the grounds of those commissions, which were very legal within the regulations when they bought those businesses. They're all now gone. And so we've destroyed the value of those small financial advising businesses because of the disallowance, because it disallowed all regulations. And the Labor Party was on a joint ticket with us on those grandfathering issues. We should have waited till this week. It was a political grandstand last week. Done the legislation, done the amendments. We'd have kept the grandfathering for sure, and it wouldn't have been so hard on those small businesses.
So why couldn't you convince the crossbenchers of that?
Well, Sam Dastyari happened to convince Nick Xenophon and a few others. Here's a great political ploy we can do now. And they went with it last week, and I spoke to them personally, 4 or 5 of those crossbenchers. I said, now, you've destroyed the grandfathering, you fix it, because you've destroyed the cash flow of those small businesses.
So you are utterly outmanoeuvred by Sam Dastyari.
Oh, he had the numbers. When you got the numbers in the Senate, that's how it goes. And, of course...
Well, he doesn't have the numbers. He got the numbers.
Yeah, exactly. With Jackie Lambie and Ricky Muir doing a backflip on what they've done the previous 2 times we'd voted on this in the Senate, They reversed their position. That gave Sam Dastyari the numbers, hence a disallowance, now the mess.
Okay, Terri Butler, FOFA.
I'm proud of Senator Dastyari's work. Yeah. He did bring together people with different views for common sense purposes. And if you want to start pointing fingers about why this regulation was disallowed, why did Senator Cormann push these changes through by regulation in the first place? Because again, the government was unable to negotiate its program through the Senate.
With the Greens and Labor.
Complete failure of the government to negotiate. And so arrogantly, through the back door, push in a regulation knowing that it was absolutely at risk of being disallowed because they didn't have the support of the senators for the legislation in the first place. It was a terrible
Greens and Labor dominated before July 1.
Terrible
Greens and Labor dominated the Senate.
By this government to try to push through changes by regulation, which they know they shouldn't have done. They know it was tricky. They know it was sneaky. And this is why, Chris, that we've been asking them to rule out doing the same thing for the GP co-payment. We don't want to see them pushing the GP co-payment through by regulation for very similar reasons. They should actually be negotiating and trying to convince the Australian people in the Australian Senate of the strength of their policy ideas, not pushing things through the back door.
Okay, a couple of other issues quickly before we wind up. Australia Post has put a corporate plan to the government. The indications are it won't be approved or looked at until after Christmas. You've got post office owners, the licensed post office group saying, hey, there's a whole lot of our members could go out of business. Terri Butler, to you first, is this a priority? Should the government be looking at this, maybe raising the price of stamps, etc., like now rather than putting it off until next year?
Well, the government needs to give operators certainty. We're not just talking about Australia Post, but also franchisees who have Australia Post franchises and consumers. So, I mean, the fact is consumers rely on Australia Post, small and micro businesses rely on Australia Post. We all need to have some certainty around what's going to happen for Australia Post to try to maintain profitability. It is up to this government to work with Australia Post to come up with a plan to ensure that profitability, and I'll be waiting to see what they've got to say.
I chaired the inquiry into Australia Post, and it's up to Ahmed Fahur as boss. He's paid the big bucks to make sure those licensed post offices, some 2,800 of them out of the 4,400 post offices in Australia, make a profit and remain viable. And that is our big concern, and we've made it quite clear to Ahmed Fahur that is the issue, and he needs to work on that, whether it be better distribution of the funds from the increasing parcel movements. Sure, they've lost their letter volumes, they've lost their income, but the post office must remain viable.
But isn't the situation, I might be incorrect here, but my reading of it is that Australia Post has a corporate plan to address some of these issues. It's put it to the government, but the government's not getting back until after Christmas.
Well, I haven't seen that corporate plan. I haven't been involved in the last couple of months since I handed in that chair's position. But I don't know if that is the case or not. But the fact is this: those people who've got licensed post offices paid big money for them on a cash flow, and that's dwindled enormously, and they need to have the cash flow put back in, and Australia Post has got to do that.
Okay, just finally, it's White Ribbon Day, Senator. You're wearing your white ribbon.
Yep.
Finally, an issue where there's unity, no doubt.
Oh, for sure.
I think that's right.
You know, violence against women and children, to me, if a man harms a woman, that is a coward's act.
And it's been really heartening to see the level of support from the police commissioners and from the Defence Force this morning. And look, Bill Shorten's been speaking out very strongly on family violence, violence against women and children the last couple of days as well, because I think there is a strong resolve in this place to deal with the issue. I thought that what the police commissioners had to say yesterday morning was really inspirational. And as Bill said, it's actually about men talking to men. Most perpetrators of family violence aren't men, and I think that what's been really lovely over the last few days is to see the real commitment to that proposition.
Okay, Terri Butler, Senator John Wacka Williams, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.